welcome everyone. Thank you to the candidates, the Women's Club for letting us use this hall, to our TV crew, and my fellow area councilors. And thank you very much to the audience for being here. We really appreciate your participation in the democratic process and your interest in these candidates. We hope that this will provide a vigorous exploration of the issues and a chance for voters, both in the room and especially watching the video later on, to learn more about each candidate and understand the issues in advance of the upcoming election on November 7th. It's coming fast. The format and rules for the debate have been agreed upon in advance by representatives of the campaigns. The format tonight will be that of a conversation. I'm going to ask each candidate a question. They'll respond. Each single response, we're going to try to limit to 2 minutes so that we keep the flow going. And each candidate will get a shot at pretty much the same question. And then we'll have a period where we have a discussion to drill down on some of the differences. At various points in the debate, we will try to select a question that's pertinent to sort of the topic that we've been on and present that to the candidates. And as I said, during the debate, we ask that the audience remain totally silent throughout, no cheering, no applause, so that we can focus on the candidates' answers. The one exception to that silence rule is right now as we welcome our candidates for City Councilor from Ward 6, current Councilor Richard Blazar and Brenda Noel. Okay, Councilor Blazar, we're going to start with a little bit of more of the personal and biographical in lieu of the opening statements. Richard Blazar, an attorney by profession, business, real estate, litigation, I understand from your website, a lifelong resident of Newton, living in Newton Center, elected to the City Council in 2009. You're serving the end of your 8th year now. And your committee assignments have been included programs and services, land use, and he's currently the vice chair of the Public Safety and Transportation. Am I getting this correct?
Perfect.
And you're on the Finance Committee. So looking back, we're going to give you the first question here. Looking back on your 8 years on the council, what are the issues that you have fought for, proposals that you've introduced, which best illustrate your vision for what Newton should be and how your particular skills and background have been brought to bear to achieve results?
Well, that's a good question, a long question. I think most of my ideas about what we should do as a city councilor have been based on the committees that I've been in, which is Finance Committee for this past 6 years and the Public Safety Committee for the last 2 years as Vice Chairman. The Finance Committee, I think, has done an excellent job in trying to balance the finances of the city, which has been a very difficult project for a number of reasons. Before I came into the City Council in 2010, there was a big lack of, I think, analysis as to what was going on in the city financially. And basically what that meant was that a lot of the financial problems in Newton had been kicked down the road and not addressed. So when I got onto the Finance Committee, thank goodness Lenny Gentile was running it, as was Ruth Ann Fuller as Vice Chairman, and we really went in deeply into looking at the finances. There were a lot of problems that we had because of the pensions and the what we called OPEB, which is health insurance for the retirees, had not been at all taken care of. And we got ourselves into a big debt financially, and we had to figure out how to get out of that debt, which I think we worked hard on doing. In addition, we wanted to keep the AAA bond rating for the city, which is very important to the way we loan money, get money back. And I think the other problem was we had actually no money, zero money in the rainy day fund, which is a fund for reserves. We were able to get that up to $20 million in the last 8 years, so we have reserves of that amount of money. And I think we've done a good job on that. And we've also addressed a lot of problems that we had with the buildings, the schools, the fire stations. There are now four new fire stations in the city and a new headquarters. I was on the Newton Center task force for the headquarters building, which we've able to preserve, and for the station there.
Thank you, Councilor Blazar. Let's bring in Brenda Noel. So Brenda, you would be coming to the City Council without prior experience in elected office. Your background, if I understand from your materials online, you're a social worker by training. Your website mentions the work you've done with Newton Wellesley Weston Committee for Community Living, which is an organization that serves people with intellectual and developmental disabilities. You've been a resident of Newton for 7 to 8 years. So for voters that are not familiar with you and would like to know how your background would apply to the City Council, can you give us some situations where your background, where you had to work with teams, for example, the City Council, they have to work together, their goals may be shared sometimes, divergent other times. Have you had experiences like this that you think would lend itself to work on the City Council? And if you have a specific example of where you were successful at implementing something that perhaps you weren't, that ended up not being exactly what your vision was for it, but you worked with others and came to some shared common goal.
Sure. So first of all, thank you so much for hosting this debate. I really appreciate the Area Council for doing this. So I think that I am uniquely skilled and qualified for the role of City Councilor. I have a personal and professional history of 25 years of living my values through my practice of social work, through activism, through being a mother and a family person. So in terms of experiences where, there's several experiences. I don't think you can be a leader, and I've had several positions where I've been asked to lead challenging situations, and I don't think you can do it without building consensus and without getting people to buy in. So it's sort of my bread and butter. My degree in social work is actually in macro social work, which means I went to school for community organizing and policy work. If I would just think of one touchstone moment, and several of you may have heard this because I've been talking about it a little bit on the campaign trail, it was my experience at the Massachusetts Office for Victim Assistance when I was the director of grant management. So I managed federal dollars for the state, specifically to serve victims of crime. And I was in that seat from 2000 to 2004, which was when I was working in that position on 9/11. And we were the office that received the federal dollars to work specifically with the victims who left out of Boston that morning. And it was a very challenging time because there was a lot of people who were protective of their role. We worked with the Red Cross, Social Security, we worked with the FBI, the airlines didn't want to give up their flight manifestos. And it was a really challenging time. And we got the money we received from the federal government, we got a phone call from Senator Kennedy's office who said, why aren't these folks being served? You've got the federal dollars. And I apologized to this chief of staff and said, we can't figure out who these families are. And he invited us all into his office, all these disparate groups, and we talked and we shared lists and we worked together. And although we all had very different agendas and we were all very protective of our little piece of the puzzle, we all had a common goal of serving these families.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Okay, so that's a little bit about your past. Now let's look at the future. So let's get into the question of why you're running, your vision for Newton. And since Richard went first, we'll start with Brenda this time. What is the most important issue facing Newton that you personally would be well suited to, that you would want to jump into, hit the ground running, so to speak, that you feel your background's match for? What is it? Is there one area in particular that kind of sticks out for you that where you think you would bring an initiative or join in on one, something that's driving you when you think of, if I get elected?
Sure. I don't think I have to tell anybody in this room, city government is incredibly complicated. So I don't think there's any one issue, because you can't touch on one issue without it impacting others. You can't touch on housing without thinking about your transportation, without thinking about the environment, without thinking about our schools. So I think what I'm uniquely skilled at doing is having the capacity to juggle all those issues at the same time. And I think any good city councilor cannot be a single issue councilor. You've got to think of all of those competing needs when you're serving your community. I have my background, I have some various different experiences in doing policy, working for victims of crime, and most recently, the last 5 years, I've worked for affordable housing for individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities. So I have, a deeper bench on housing in this city, but I'm smart enough to know that housing doesn't stand alone. You've got to think about the impact on the community. You've got to think about transportation and traffic. So there is no one single issue. Why I'm excited about the opportunity to serve Ward 6 is because I see the role of the city council as shaping the future of this city, and that the city council needs to have a guiding hand in that. And we need to reflect our values in our policy.
Okay, thank you. So Dick, same question essentially. So what, if you get reelected, what initiatives, what proposals do you think you would bring in? What would be your focus in the coming term? What can voters expect in another term of Councilor Blazar?
Well, I think one of my focuses, without any question, is what's going on with the city as far as redevelopment in the village centers and throughout the city. I was, as I said, been here a long time, many years, and I've seen the city grow and change. I think to an extent that basically we're in a situation where there's a lot of discord between certain groups of people as to what we should do with development. And I think development is a tough question. I've always felt that if any development occurs in any neighborhood, it should be the neighborhoods that sit down and have a vital role in what's going to happen in their neighborhoods. And a good example of that is over at Four Corners right now, where there's a Whole Foods. In back of that Whole Foods, there's a proposed development to put in about 15 or 16 townhouses right next to the aqueduct. That area has been open and free space since I've been here, probably for even way before I was here. And the people who live next to that project stood up and wanted to know why they were putting such a big development in. We were able to talk with the developer and the people who were abutters to try to make a development that would work, not just for the developer, but for the people who live in that neighborhood. And we're getting pretty close to doing that. The development has been cut in half in its size, and we're still negotiating it. And I'm hopeful that we will be able to reach a negotiated settlement. As an attorney, I've done a lot of work on negotiated settlements. I've been doing that for a long time, and I think I'm very good at it. I think if we can work together, it's much better than getting into problems with fighting with each other, which is what's happening more and more in the city with every development.
Thank you. You mentioned a couple of things that we'll be touching on as the debate goes on, and actually one of them sort of brought to mind the next question, so it's not a bad segue. And that's sort of this general topic of legislative independence, I call it, and also the issue of local versus citywide perspective. As a city councilor, there's always this sort of tension between what's good for a neighborhood, what's good for the city. And what I want to do with this next question, so this will be for you, Dick, a hypothetical, okay? We're in Newton Highlands. Let's say that a developer comes to the city and says, I want a special permit. I want that, the downtown area of Newton Highlands is, needs to be revitalized, and we can do that with a little bit more, with some mixed use, smart growth development, and this is just a hypothetical now, okay? Because I think I know how you would lean on this, but just take the side that that you look at this proposal and you say, you know what, it's not that big, it suits me, I like this. This would be good for the shops here, it would be good for the residents, and my friends think so too. I've got some people on the council that are in favor of this. This would be a good thing for me to vote for. However, the residents come out in full force, 4-1, 3-1 against this project. They're calling you. They're beating down your door. They're showing up to city council meetings. very opposed to this. How do you vote?
Well, this is a very kind of interesting hypothetical for a lot of reasons.
I guess maybe I should have flipped this one for you.
Well, it reminds me a lot of Newtonville. And it wouldn't be any difference whether it was Newtonville, Newton Highlands, or Newton Center. I have always felt that it's not my role, nor is it any of the city councilors' role, to decide what should happen in the neighborhoods. That role belongs to the neighbors who live here. They're here because they like it here. They moved here. They didn't move here because they wanted to see a lot of changes in the neighborhood. And I think that without question, the first thing I would ask is get the neighbors together and talk to them about what they want and why they want the way it is. So, there's always some kind of differences between even the neighbors, which of course causes a lot of problems for somebody trying to make a decision. But the first thing you do as a city councilor is you go and you talk with the neighbors. In Newtonville, it was with the abutters to the Austin Street project, is what the businesses, which I knew very well because I grew up in Newtonville and my office is there now. So I talked with all the businesses. 34 of the 35 businesses did not want that big a project at Austin Street. As a matter of fact, the interesting thing about Austin Street was that of the, originally it was an 18 to 30 unit project, which would have flown by without any problem, which I supported, which everybody supported down there. The problem was when it got up to about 68 units and it was high to start, that's when the tension comes, and that's when the fight comes. So to me, the number one issue is what do the neighbors want and the abutters and the businesses want. That's what we should be looking at, not what the developer wants and not even what the city councilors want. I think that's our job, and it's a very important job, and some of us are not doing it right, frankly, in my opinion, and I've spoken out on this many times. I don't think that we should let the developers come in here and decide how they're going to redo the neighborhood, and I feel strongly about that.
Thank you. Brenda, same question.
There's a lot of things that Councilor Blazar just said that I think we see differently. So one of the things Councilor Blazar said is that people come to Newton and they don't want things to change.
I didn't say that.
I think people come to Newton because they want good schools and they want strong community and they want vibrant village centers. And as I mentioned in the beginning, the role of city council is to be a guiding hand in our community. And if we are passive in that role, we are not going to maintain the vibrant community in which we now live and want to continue to live in. So to answer your question about balancing the interests of the abutters with the greater good of the community, I think it's a tough one. And I think this is where we need to build consensus and find common ground. And I do think that dialogue in the city has been incredibly divisive. We're in a very divisive time as a community. So one of the things I commit to as a city councilor is to really change the way we talk about these things and to find common ground and build consensus and help everyone understand that when the tide rises, all the boats float. We're all going to be better with vibrant village centers. Newton Center full of banks and nail salons is not good for any of us.
Thank you.
Could I respond to that?
Do you want to follow up?
I would like to. First of all, it's not that I'm against change, Brenda, at all. Okay. Second of all, I don't think it's the role of the city councilor to tell the neighborhoods what they ought to be doing. The neighborhoods they're the ones that live there. They want to live there because they moved to that neighborhood and they like it. So I don't think it's our role at all to change things because we think it's a good thing to do. And I would strongly disagree that that's the way we, as a city councilor, we should act.
Okay. Well, can I just ask one follow-up to that, which I'm just curious about this myself, and I'm sure probably a lot of people are. How do you know what all the residents think? Because we've got 88,000 people in the city. In this ward, the average ward, there's 8 of them, so it's probably average of 11,000.
12,000 people in Ward
6. 12,000. So roughly the average. So, the squeaky wheels, people that are upset about something often come out, and you don't really know what people that you're not hearing from think. We don't have Gallup here or polling everybody once a week on what they think about Austin Street or something. So how do you do it? I mean, Councilor Blazar, you've been doing this for 8 years, so I'm just curious, like, how do you gauge it? Is it just the number of calls? I mean, that's sort of what I've heard, but if someone calls and nobody else is calling, that means a lot, right? Yeah. But how do you get the pulse of the community?
Well, it's a good question. It's a hard question to answer because usually the people who are most talkable and want to get to you for any situation are going to email you. They don't call anymore. They email you, and I get about, I'd say, 100 emails a day from constituents, and you have to look at that to begin with. But there's a lot more people out there who don't email you, and you don't really know what they're doing. And I've been trying very hard, and I think in most cases I don't have a problem people telling me what to do. My problem is balancing the differences among these people who have different ideas of what to do. But I don't think there's any way you can say, well, I only heard from 100 people, and therefore I can ignore the other ones. So I'm always trying to find. I have no problem in Newton Center. I have a lot of people calling me. Unfortunately, they're all, there's 2 or 3 different groups out in Newton Center, and you have to, do your best to try to get some consensus with them. But the ones that you don't hear from, I actually hear a lot when I walk the ward, as I'm sure Brenda did as well. When we walk the ward, it's amazing to me how many people you meet who you've never seen before, I haven't seen before, and who have really good ideas, but they're busy with their lives, they're busy with their businesses and their work, and they don't really get involved that much in city government, and that's a difficult way to try to make a decision.
Do you want to respond
Absolutely.
to that?
So this is another area where I think voters will see a clear difference. I'm going to approach this from complete transparency and communication. I've already started to have, monthly e-newsletters. We've got so many tools at our disposal with the web, with, ways to communicate, email, Facebook. I also will hold monthly office hours if people want to come and talk to me. I do want to know what the ward thinks. I don't want to guess what people think. I don't want to just hear from 100. I want to hear from everybody. And that's where I think I would be very different than Councilor Blazar in my approach to the job.
I actually did have a question right on that. So constituent services, communications, that type of thing, which is what you were just saying. And the question was, in this information age we live in, politicians at all levels are taking advantage of not only email lists and the web, but also social media, such as Facebook, and of course Twitter. We all know some politicians use Twitter. I can't think of anybody by name right now. And other sites to stay connected with constituents. But not everybody hangs out online. Not everybody's looking at a Twitter feed or wants to be flooded with email. What are the ways you see yourself using these new tools or old methods to best serve the residents of Ward 6?
Well, I did just mention several tools. I think we've already started with our campaign in terms of communicating to people. It's been a really, amazing to get to know people, and I think it's important. We sort of saw the debacle in Ward 6 with the historic district of what happens when we don't communicate. There was a situation where people weren't even aware that the historic district was happening, even though many efforts were made to communicate to people. I see, Bob, many efforts were made so that people know that the whole historic district was happening, and people still didn't know. So clearly every effort we made wasn't enough. My colleague, signed off on the historic district of December 2016, and there was an opportunity there to let people know that this was in the works, and people didn't know. So communication is critical, because the outcome of that was a very divisive process in our community that we now must repair. So if we don't communicate, it's actually to our own detriment. So I intend to hold office hours. I intend to be accessible on email, by phone. I don't ever want to hear from a constituent that they can't get in touch with me. And it's part of who I am.
Okay, and please don't mention that I was the outreach person on the area council. So, Dick, do you want to take a shot at this?
Well, I'll take a little shot at this. First of all, I did sign off, as did Vicky Danberg and Greg Schwartz, the other 2 aldermen in Ward 6, on Bob Burke and Rodney's proposal to look at the possibility of having an historic district. That did not mean I signed off to have an historic district. it meant that I'd said that it was a good idea to go look for it, and that's what we did. And Bob Burke could tell you that. It wasn't like I was saying I want this and shoving it down people's throat. Number one. Number two is there's plenty of ways to meet with people and to converse with people, whether it's email, phone, personally. I have to admit I am not a great one on websites, but thank goodness I have my daughter who has helped me a lot on this campaign on websites, because that's not my cup of tea. I have no problem meeting with any constituent, whether they're for me or against me. I had no problems at all with people contacting me with their concerns. And I really cannot think of one person who said they tried to contact me and I never got back to them. So that's not been a problem at all. And as far as having monthly meetings, that was probably started by Emily Norton several years ago, and I thought it was a great idea for Emily, because she was right in the middle of a big fight in Newtonville, and it led to the Newtonville having an area council, and that's a good thing to have. Highlands Area Council is a good thing to have. I've been to most of those meetings over the last 8 years. Stephen can tell you, Serge can tell you, Janice Bork can tell you. I've been very involved in that, and I don't think that anybody can say that I've not been trying to meet people and haven't been successful in it.
Thank you. Shall we move on? New topic. Dick, you brought up the unfunded liabilities in the city fiscal situation. Just as background, the city has the OPEB that you mentioned, other post-employment, what's the benefits, and to approximately $700 million for that, and then there's the pensions at $300 million. So it's a total of about $1 million in unfunded. I'm sorry, $1 billion. Decimal point problem in my brain. Depending upon what happens at the federal level with Medicaid, Affordable Care Act, we could also be facing significantly higher healthcare costs. Correct me if I'm wrong, which would exacerbate the trouble with these liabilities that I mentioned. Now, the Mayor Warren has initiated a plan to try to deal with this. He's promised that OPEB will be fully funded by 2042. Is this plan going to work? Could we still have serious fiscal headaches down the road? Are you comfortable that over time this problem will be solved, or is it insufficient to keep us out of danger should the economy go a little haywire? Dick, I think it's your turn.
I only have 2 minutes for this.
Okay. We have to solve all of the city's problems by 9 o'clock.
Well, let me start by saying that I think Seti Warren has done a wonderful job on addressing these issues. They were not addressed for many, many years, and when he came into office, he did a lot of work on this, and as was driven by some of the city councilors. Let me straighten this out a little bit. The pension issue is a $300 million needed funds, which we have looking at to get by 2028 or 2030. So that's about 10 or 12 years down the road. I think that's doable. There's a lot of money being put away for the pensions. I think probably about $22 million a year. OPEB is a totally different story. It's basically health insurance for retirees, and the numbers are astounding. It's about $700 million, and the dates that we're trying to get that thing funded was actually 2048, I believe. 2042 is hopeful, but I think 2048 was the original date. Can we do it? I think we can do it. But the problem is that there are also huge other numbers of debt that we're in now. If you look at the schools that were Newton South and Newton North, the principal and interest for those two schools, the building of Newton North and fixing up Newton South, principal interest was $296 million for those two schools. We've now done Ainger, Cabot, Zervis, and we're going to do Aquinas. That's going to add probably another $220 million. I actually reviewed these numbers with the comptroller this afternoon because I wanted to make sure I knew them. So we have basically a $500+ million debt for the schools. Now, I'm not saying that we shouldn't have done some of those the schools, but that's a huge number there. and it's something that we have to figure out how to pay. There's also other problems. Those are the three big ones. But can we do it? I don't know if we're going to be able to change it, but at least we're moving to try to do it, which I think is important.
Okay, thank you. Brenda Noel.
Do you want me to answer that
Same
question?
Have you looked at this plan from Mayor Warren, which I believe got some sort of approval from somebody? I can't remember the name of the. It was like certification or something that somebody who analyzed it and said this will work. Mm-hmm. Maybe somebody can shout it out, but no shouting during the debate.
Okay, I'm ready
so
to go.
what do you think of this plan, and do you think we could still have fiscal uncertainty in the future on this?
So, as I understand it, we're getting a new mayor, right?
It looks that way.
Yeah. So I think it's going to be the responsibility. I've followed both, Scott Lennon and Ruth Ann Fuller's plan on this. Mm-hmm. In terms of what we need to set aside. I think Ruth Ann Fuller did much of the work on this. And as I understand it, we have, $1 billion responsibility to our retirees that we have to fulfill. Pardon me. So I don't think it's can we do it. It's we're going to do it. We need to do it. It's part of keeping us fiscally sound, as a city, and that there's a plan in place to do that. And my understanding, the role of the city council is to approve that budget that gets presented by the mayor. So, I would be looking for a budget that addresses some of these fiscal deficits.
Okay, but I guess my question is, we can have a good plan, and I'm not a finance expert and I haven't studied this problem in detail, but isn't there some danger that if healthcare costs rise, and I think we know that there's a potential for that happening. I mean, suppose healthcare rates go up 30, 40% or more, and wouldn't that blow this this plan? Yes, you're right. We would have to honor these commitments. I'm not sure exactly how it would work, but isn't the city in danger of having a debt situation that we can't fund with the current tax rates?
I think we're all in danger. I mean, we don't have a crystal ball about the future of healthcare, and obviously the national discourse on this is very volatile. And do we, this $1 billion liability is upsetting and is getting everybody's attention. Absolutely. I think there's a plan in place. It's impacting our overall budget. It's aggressive. It's on course, and I think we need to stay the course and make adjustments if the situation presents itself that we need to make adjustments.
Okay, thank you. Let's move on to another financial topic, the larger issue of the budget, and I think it's been touched on already. And when I looked at the capital improvement plan, which was from the mayor's office when Mayor Warren first got elected, and we have it's basically a list of all of the projects that we think we need to do over the coming time period. And when I look at the budget for the school buildings that you were just talking about, I actually came up with a smaller number. I would love to see the list of numbers that you have, but I saw after Cabot, Ainger, and Zervis, we have, I think, Lincoln Elliott. We have other school building projects around the city that I totaled $91 million. Maybe I came up short. But if it's even bigger than that, even more to the point. And a lot of the city budget, I think I've got 65% support salary and benefits for city employees, including teachers, police, firefighters, and others. There will likely be pressure to increase salaries and benefits, not to mention health insurance and retirement allocations that we're talking about, greater than the 2.5% allowed by law, Proposition 2.5. Should we increase property taxes is the question, beyond 2.5%? Would you support an override? Are there spending cuts that we would need to do? How would we pay for everything if it came down to this? What would your proposal be for funding these expenses that many people believe are much needed? Would you support an override? I'm not sure if I made myself clear on that.
Did.
Okay.
You did. Do you want me to answer first?
I think I had. Who went first last time?
I don't remember.
You're the moderator,
Okay.
Steve.
Brenda, you go.
Okay.
I'm hearing
I would
eagerness.
not support an increase in property taxes. Absolutely not. In terms of an override, again, the mayor presents a budget, the city council, votes on it. What I've heard and what I think we can all agree on is we don't want an override. That's not what we want out of the gate. The reality is that the services that we expect and have in Newton outweigh our tax base. So what we need to figure out then is, are there other sources that we're not considering? Are there things that need to be cut? So that's what I would look
So
into.
what do you have any ideas for what you would cut? Do you think?
I mean, it's part of a big picture on where we can save money. I heard there's 12 counselors that might be cut soon.
Let's see, $10,000 times.
So
That's not going to do it.
So, it's part of
Maybe we could rent out their seats, though.
Yeah. It's part of a larger, a big picture. Off the top of my head, no. I have to look at the whole thing holistically, see where there's potential fat, but I don't think we should be raising property taxes.
Okay. Dick?
Well, first of all, the city can only raise property taxes a total of 2.5% per year, except for what they call new construction. That can be on top of that. And you can also have overrides. If you're going to have an override, you should have it for a specific purpose. For the two schools, which was Ainger and Cabot, they were debt exclusions, basically meaning that all the money that you override with that has to go into the schools. And that was actually helpful to do because you could have a straight vote on whether you wanted to redo Ainger or redo Cabot. And those votes were definitely positive. The other way to do it is to have a general override, which we had also, and that was, Zervis was thrown in for up to $40 million. There was the fire station in the headquarters building, and they were doing roads and getting some more money for the teachers. So those are basically two ways you can do things on overrides, debt exclusions. The problem is that the city can only, even going down that route, the city can only raise a certain amount of money above the 2.5%. And it seems to me that if you're going to have an override, you have to have it for a specific purpose, and you got to make sure that the money should be going to that purpose. Because if you're going to do another school for $52 million, which is really what's headed, Aquinas is now headed in that direction, which really shocked the heck out of me, because I thought we were going to buy that school. We bought the property for $15 million, and now it's all of a sudden we're talking $52 million for that school. So you've got to start looking, I think, at the school buildings and what you're doing with the schools. The trouble was the schools have been, not been maintained properly. So we had to do some, Ainger and Cabot had to be redone. I'm not so sure Zervis had to be redone. And I voted for the override, the general override, but I was not at all sure that we needed to spend a brand new school in Zervis, which I think is huge, and about 3/4 of a mile away from Ainger. So, I can't tell you that we can't raise our taxes.
Oh, thank you. Any follow-up from you, Brenda? Okay. Do we have an audience question on fiscal matters?
Campaign finance first?
Okay, let's do that.
There's two
We have
questions.
2 questions on campaign finance. Could each candidate please tell us who the 3 largest contributors to your campaign are and what their occupations are?
My biggest donor, confession, is Ducky Noel, my father. He's very excited about this.
Is he a developer too?
No, but he does work at General Dynamics. He's a draftsman, a union guy. General Dynamics is a defense contractor in Groton, Connecticut. My next donor, I'm embarrassed to admit this, big one, Dean Fairchild, my husband. He's a big fan. And then my co-chairs are probably tied for 3 and 4. Claudia Henderson and Liz Heiser. They also are supporting me and believe in me. In terms of developers, so I actually would not take a gift from a developer, take a contribution. People are able to donate at my campaign through my website, and so I did receive a contribution, a personal contribution from someone whose occupation happened to be a developer, so I immediately refused the charge But the way that campaign finance works is it hit my account as a contribution. So you would need to click onto the expenditures page of my campaign finance page to see the return. So I encourage you to do that. The other great thing about transparency and the internet and campaign finance is that I encourage all of you to go look at all my contributors and see who's funding my campaign. What I'm thrilled to announce, I was actually just doing some data, is I've got a broad base of support. I've got gifts as low as $15, and the largest gifts are at $500. And I'm really proud of the level of support I received from this community and my family. My
Thank you.
family has been wonderful contributors.
Thank you. Dick, you want to answer those questions? Do you need me to read them again, or?
No, I think I got it.
Okay, yeah. Made an impression.
I think my largest contributors were neighbors and my mother-in-law, who was going to she's 97 and a half years old, so I think she's trying to get rid of some of her money, which I don't object to. My wife hasn't given me a nickel yet. But her mother-in-law's picking up the slack. And I agree with what Brenda says. I don't take any money from developers, and I'm not so sure that if you took money from a developer, it's a bad thing. I did have a brother-in-law who was, he was in Chapman Construction, which is down the street here, and my prior campaign 8 years ago, he did give me a nice chunk of money. I don't think that had anything to do with me, doing anything for him in Newton at all. I don't necessarily think it's wrong to take money from developers, frankly. It depends, who they are. If they're your brother-in-law or something like that, I don't think that's a problem. And even if they aren't, I don't know if that's a problem either. But I think that my largest contribution was, I think, from my mother-in-law, who I think gave me $250 twice. So that was $500.
Okay, thank you. Okay, the next set of questions all are about development issues. There are a lot of sort of subtopics within there: historic preservation, zoning, affordable housing. So I want to try to address them separately somewhat. But the first question is just, and I have it to you, Dick, because I'm starting to lose track of who's gone first. But change is upon us, as many have said. We've got market forces that want to come in and spruce things up. Of course, they make a profit. They make changes. Change is difficult. But these market forces are undeniable, and most people that I hear agree that we have some housing issues to address at various levels of housing. How much should we encourage some of these new development trends in the city? And what kind of development do we want? So this is a general question. And we're going to get into affordable housing separately. I'm not sure if it's possible to actually exclude some of this. But specifically, if I can get it down to a specific question, is there an area of Ward 6, do you think, that would be ripe for an opportunity where we could do some mixed-use, smart growth type of thing that would be on a scale that you'd be happy with, that needs it, say, to get more feet on the ground near the retail and all that kind of stuff? Do you have a specific idea in either, say, Newton Center or Newton Highlands that you could imagine a project that you would vote yes to?
Well, Newton Center had a task force about 10 years ago to look at this very topic. What should we do with Newton Center? It basically was split into 3 different groups. One group thought we should do nothing. Another group thought we should do a little bit. And a third group thought we should do a lot. And as a result, nothing happened. And that's where it stands right now. I'm not somebody who thinks that the village centers are necessarily in terrible shape and need a big overdrawn work done to. I think that the village centers, I like the village centers. I like the Highlands. I like Newtonville. I like Newton Center, which are the 3 that I'm in 99% of my time. They're all different in ways, and I think that there's a problem sometimes filling them up with rentals, but it's always been like that in Newton. Sometimes you have empty places for a while. What I don't want to happen is what happened in Newtonville, where they had great, talking about vitality in a village center. There was great vitality in Newtonville. Boston Ballet was there. Newtonville Camera was there. They had Caroon Restaurant was there, the Sunoco Station, barbershops, and now they're all gone, okay, because a developer decided he wanted to take over that property, put up a lot of housing and some more commercial space and make a lot of money. That's what I don't want to see happening, and that's what's happening in Newtonville, and that is something which I think is what we don't want. I don't think that the Newton Center or even Newton Highlands. I like Newton Highlands. It's a nice place. It's got good stores in it. It's got good restaurants, good places to go. O'Hara's, limited editions. There's a whole lot of good places here. I don't think that Newton Highlands needs a huge do-over. I don't think it needs a huge mixed-use development. I think I don't mind changes here as long as they're okay. The neighbors and the abutters and the businesses are okay with some of those changes. But I just don't. I'm not in the I guess position of saying that. Well, I have a great vision for any of these centers, and this is what it should be. And having me as a developer come in there and do something to a village which they think is good because
Thank
making
you.
a profit out of it.
Thank you. Brenda, on your website it says...
Do you want me to answer that question?
Yes, but I want to ask what I've got. You're going to be able to address that, both things. So your website says that you want to encourage smart growth that will increase the commercial tax base, revitalize our village centers and commercial areas. Definitely respond to what Dick was just saying, but I'd like to ask you also if you can define what you mean by smart growth, how it should be done so that city resources and traffic congestion are not negatively impacted. And again, are there specific parts of Ward 6 that you think are ripe for development?
So I want to answer the question you asked Dick, though, because I think that you asked a different question, and I can get to your second
Sure.
question. So,
Well, I asked both of you to name an area in Ward 6
Sure.
that you would, and what kind of development you
the
would be
way
in
in which that
favor
you
of.
framed it, this idea of where should development come in, that's where I think we're thinking about this all wrong. I think that instead of being reactive to these projects that get thrust upon the city council, where we're sort of playing catch up and kicking the tires and trying to make the project fit the community, we need to be proactive as a community around what kind of projects we want. So one of the things that I've spent some time with is the Newton Comprehensive Plan, which is a little bit outdated, but it has a roadmap for what type of development makes sense in our community to keep Newton vibrant, sustainable, walkable. And so I would like to switch the dynamic of, instead of being so reactive, which is what's happening on Needham Street, that we be proactive, similar to the project, that happened on Austin Place or Austin Street, where we worked with the developer around a project that made sense for that space. So I would, again, try to switch that dialogue around and, be the leaders in this and partner with developers instead of being reactive.
Okay, so does that mean, so I'm when
I
you're
can
talking,
answer your second question now too about
Okay.
how I define smart growth.
Sure.
So
Well,
we
yeah.
recently got a survey from the League of Women Voters, so it's all online, where they basically asked you to prioritize, what types of things would you consider? Where would your priority be around density in village centers? What's some of the first things you would consider? And so both of us were asked to rate that. So I encourage you to go and you can see the side-by-side comparison. But I look at, there's actual best practices definitions around walkability and, what are the benefits of density in village centers? And we see benefits to the environment. We see benefits to the community. It increases walkability. It gets more people out of their cars. If we can encourage green spaces, it's better for the environment. And we also, these mixed-use projects where you've got retail on the first floor, residential on the second and third floor, it's a way to revitalize some of these village centers so that you've got people out of their cars, you've got people shopping, you've got a sense of community, you've got people walking around and being a part of the community and bringing back, why many of us moved here, for the vibrancy of the village centers.
Okay, so let's apply that to Newton Highlands. Is it vibrant enough the way it is, in your opinion? Do you think we need to
as
bring...
Councilor Blazar mentioned, there's a lot of vacancies. I've sat, with the area council. You've been at those meetings where we're all sort of scratching our heads about why do businesses keep leaving. We actually had a conversation that Baker's Best, which was my absolute favorite place to go, their monthly rent was $14,000 a month. You can't sell eggs and toast on $14,000 a month rent. So I think we need to, figure this out. I don't think it's going to be easy, but I think we need to figure out how do we create a community where, we've got vibrant retail restaurants that are sustainable, that they can afford to be there, and that we're bringing people in to solicit and be part of the, to shop at these restaurants.
Okay, I'm trying to picture how we do that, and maybe Dick Blazar can jump in, but the city can't be telling, and correct me if I'm wrong, landlords how much rent to charge. So if the rent is high, the developer and the landlord, they want to make money. The businesses have to thrive and be able to pay those rents, and in order to thrive, they need to have foot traffic. Mm-hmm. Do we need more housing in the village centers? In other words, mixed use. Mm-hmm. Smart growth, do it in ways that the parking is okay and the traffic is okay, and we're not having more bike accidents. But how do you actually implement something like that? Dick, do you have thoughts about that?
Well,
seems to me to be a problem.
There's a couple of problems here. One is that the reason the rents are so high is because the landlords who own the properties in Newton Highlands and Newtonville and Newton Center have owned them for years. So they bought these properties 50, 60, 70 years ago, and they pass them down in the families. So there's a lot of these properties aren't even mortgaged. So it's a huge value to the owners to charge a lot of money, which is why you're getting a lot of banks in these villages, a lot of salons, some restaurants, and in Newton Center and Newton Highlands and Newtonville, a liquor store, which is probably the best use of, for at least get somebody, to relax after trying to pay the rent on these things. But unfortunately, there's no way we can really do anything about that. That we're stuck on that. The term, by the way, that I can't really stand anymore is smart growth. It's a cliche I've heard over and over and over again. I don't think it's so smart. I think smart growth is basically a way that developers want to say, this is what we should do in your village because it's smart. We're going to have more people walking, more density. As I said in Newtonville, I'm not seeing anything about smart about what's going on in Newtonville. But how we're going to fill those empty stores is hard because of e-commerce. It's brick and mortar stores are getting hit hard, big ones. And there's not a whole lot we can do about that. People are not going to these retail stores. What should we do? I wish I knew. A lot of people a lot smarter than me about this are trying to figure that out. I've read very interesting articles about it, and I'm not seeing any answers. And, when somebody like Amazon comes in, and that means that all those little stores are going to probably go out. Okay. So, if somebody could come up with a good answer, but I don't think the term smart growth to me is a cliche that I just... I start getting nervous every time I hear of it because that means a developer's coming to town.
Brenda, you've got smart growth on your website. Maybe you can elucidate us more.
Smart growth does not make me nervous.
What does it mean exactly to you?
So it means density, and it means building communities or residents that are thoughtful and mindful of local transportation, green spaces, different levels of housing, meaning you've got low income, moderate income, senior housing, so it's friendly to all ages, and it's near amenities, so that people don't necessarily have to get in their cars to go get everything. And so the reason why it's called smart growth is because it's smart. And it may be a cliche, but you know, it actually does many different things at once, meaning it's going to reduce traffic because people don't need cars. It's going to allow seniors who live in these big, beautiful homes right now in the Highlands, but they don't want to maintain those homes, to have a place to go that's elevator friendly, that they can get to amenities, they can be part of the community, and they don't have to leave the communities that they love and that they raise children in and raise families in. So there's a lot that's smart about it, and I don't think it's a cliche. I think it's a really important concept, and it's been you know, one of the things Councilor Blazar said is, he said, I don't know what the solution is. Well, I may not know the solution either, but what I do know is I'm smart enough to know that the solution is out there, that there's best practices that we can be looking at and building on. And Newton is really good at getting the experts involved.
Thank
and
you.
that's what we should be doing here.
Thank you. Dick, do you want to respond to that?
Just briefly, I don't see any smart growth having anything to do with less traffic in this city. The growth in the city is killing the traffic problem. That's not. If that's smart growth, that's why I'm against it. I don't think that density is going to give you more green open space at all. I do think that it's good, as Brenda said, to have some homes and apartments in the villages, because then you can it's good for walking. But that's for small projects. Huge projects aren't going to be good for anything like traffic or getting more amenities or more open space, in my opinion, at all.
Well, let me ask you a follow-up on that, just to play devil's advocate. So I don't know if you've probably seen, probably a lot of people have seen this video that was posted. I think I saw it on Village 14. It's about the Washington Street corridor, and it's by a city planner named Jeff Speck. Okay. So my question is, if you object to a given development, a particular mixed-use development, and you say that doesn't solve transportation problems, well, some vision like what's been sketched out for Washington Street between West Newton and Newtonville, where you have an improvement to the traffic situation. They have something called
A
road diet, where you actually, by reducing the total area of where cars can drive, you actually, I don't get it, but you actually have more capacity for the cars, at the same time making room for bike lanes, and you can separate them so it's safe. Mm-hmm. I mean, it looks really good to me, but I don't know anything about this, so you can explain why it's wrong. I got taken by the video.
Do you want me to answer?
But I want to ask Dick, though, if there's some sort of vision of the future that you would buy into that would allow people to do more of that kind of transportation, walkability, biking, maybe better bus service, whatever it is, and also having improved commuter rail stations in that area as well.
I'm for all of that. I'm for walkability. I'm for transportation. I'm for anything that's going to stop some of this traffic that's getting killed with. I'm with bike lanes. It's not that I'm against development either. The question is size of it and who's going to control it and who's going to run it. And that has to be done by the city, the residents of the city councilors getting together and figuring out what they want to do, not what the developer wants to do. This developer that you're talking about is trying to buy up more property from Newton Corner to West Newton than I've ever seen before in my life. He's got a ton of money behind him, and I don't mind him coming in with projects. His project originally on the Orr building was not. We almost had it down so we wouldn't have this big fight. We're trying to negotiate a settlement between what he wanted to build and what the neighbors and the abutters wanted to build. I thought we were really close to it, and I was working to get a negotiated settlement out of that thing. We came so darn close, and then all of a sudden he pulled out. Tried to go 40B, dropped that. Then he went back to 160 units, and we're back to where we had started. So it's not that I'm against trying to get some of this done. I think all of us want to have better transportation, especially for the seniors who don't have hardly any transportation here. But the fact is that we need to do it, and we are doing it in a way, because the mayor's office has started a zoning redesign project, which I think, if it works, is going to actually get a lot of input from the residents, and they're going to give us what they think they want to see here. But that's the way what we should be doing. It should be driven by the residents and by the businesses too, in a way, but it should not be driven by the developers.
Okay. Brenda, I would love to
Can I-
hear your response to all
Yeah.
that.
So you were talking about the Jeff Speck video.
Right. Did
Around
you
the
see
road
that?
diet. Yeah.
Yeah.
So let's just address that for a minute. So one of the things that I think is so exciting about, this role of a city councilor and also living in Newton is this idea of best practices. There is so much talent and creativity on to solve our city's problems that you see at the city level, and you also see outsiders who are coming in and saying, hey, look at this. This is best practices. This is working in other communities. Take a look at this. So I encourage you all to take a look at the video. It's a proposal of how we can improve traffic on Washington Street, and it's counterintuitive. It's saying we can actually reduce traffic if we decrease the width of the road. Now, none of us think that makes sense. We think, no, you go fast on a highway because it's a big road. So there is a leap of faith here in that we have to believe the evidence, we have to believe best practices, and we have to look to the experts. But I think it's an exciting time to adopt some of this creative thinking about how we can make the city better. And part of what I would bring to this role is that willingness to listen and that willingness to get my head around things that maybe don't seem intuitive, but are things that we need to consider.
Thank you. So, sort of on this topic, we have an audience question that goes like this. How would you address traffic congestion in Newton? Would you work to enable alternate transit modes, bike, bus, train, or work to widen roads and expand parking to further support car-based transit? Brenda, why don't you take that first?
So, as I might have mentioned, I'm a social worker. So transportation is not my area of expertise, but what I do know is I'm smart enough to know what I don't know in terms of listening to folks who have this information, looking at best practices, and everything that I've learned in the 6 months that I've been running is that we need to approach our traffic problems that we need to approach it by saying we need to move people, not move cars. And how there's all sorts of alternative ways to move people in the city, and that is through protected bike lanes. I've talked to seniors. I live on Walnut Street. Bike lanes make me nervous. Protected bike lanes make sense to me. I have 13-year-old daughters who want to ride their bikes all over the city. I like the idea of protected bike lanes. I like the idea of ride shares. We're going to get into affordable housing, but we've got a generation of folks that want to live here who aren't as tied to their cars as I am. They want to do ride shares. They like to Uber downtown on the weekends. It may seem counterintuitive to Dick and I, but this is where people are headed. And so I am ready to embrace all of these different ideas to move people. I don't think increasing our capacity to put cars on the road by expanding the lanes, as everything I understand, that's not how to do it. So.
Okay, thank you. So, historic preservation. Okay, the city of Newton has seen a lot of teardowns, and some people are alarmed by this, especially when they see some of the homes, some of the structures that replace what's torn down. The village of Newton Highlands, where I live, has over 300 historic homes. Zoning reform has been going along at a very deliberative, shall we politely say, pace. And so there, the area council had proposed the local historic district that you referred to before. What I want to ask you for starters is, do you believe that Newton Highlands is a community with a sufficient number of co-located historic homes and central business district that might constitute a historic district? And let's not get too tied down on the exact configuration of that and what's included and what's not, but do you feel that that there should be some sort of historic district to protect historic homes that constitute the sort of the look and feel of the neighborhood, and that are not currently protected by the current zoning ordinance? Dick, why don't you go first with that?
Yeah, I'm not sure exactly where you're going on this, Steve. As far as the local historic district is concerned in Newton Highlands, I think it's definitely a decision that has to be made by the people in the local historic district. I think Brenda and I agree completely on that. And what happened in Newton Highlands was that they did not get a majority of people that wanted to be in the local historic district for a variety of reasons. I don't take any stance on whether they were right or wrong. I mean, I was, as a city councilor, if the majority of people don't want a local historic district, as happened not only in Newton Highlands, but in West Newton, where the percentage was even higher against the local historic district. I think it was about 70% in West Newton and 55% in the Highlands. So if the people who are going to be in that district don't want to be in the local historic district, there shouldn't be a local historic district. Now, there are 4 others, Chestnut Hill, Upper Falls, Auburndale, and Newtonville, that have local historic districts, and they seem to work well, but the people wanted them. Here it's a different story. I don't have any bad saying about people who voted for or against them. So the local historic district does preserve historic homes. If you don't have a local historic district, you can have somebody come in and knock down a beautiful historic home. There's a demo delay maybe for a year or a year and a half on this, but unless the house is landmarked, it's very difficult to stop anybody from coming in and knocking down a home if they buy the property and waiting a year and a half until if it's preferably preserved. Then that's the whole criteria to determine that. If it still only gives you a year to a year and a half if you're on the National Register of time to change your mind and not knock it down. So again, I don't think that it's right or wrong to have a local historic district or not. It's decided by the people that are in it.
Sure. I guess what I want to hear, and now I'd like to hear Brenda's take on this, but aside from what we've already talked about, which is that things didn't go well with that effort by the area council, do you personally look at this neighborhood and think, well, there's some stuff that's worth protecting here, preserving here? And if so, what would your recommendation be, aside from better communication with the residents? Let's just put that aside. We don't really know what everybody thinks, but we did get a lot of opposition, and there was a lot of bad communication. So I just want to sort of set that all aside for the moment. Is it something that should be preserved if possible? Should there be an effort to convince people that it should be preserved? And if so, what do you think would be a recommended mechanism for doing so?
Sure. So this is the one question that I'm going to say I agree with Councilor Blazar wholeheartedly on his take on this question. So I think we're in complete alignment with that. I will say, and some of you have heard this story, when I moved to Newton Highlands, my husband and I looked for 2 years to find a house. And as I say to folks, it's, buying in Newton is not for the weak. And we finally found a house, a beautiful Victorian, with carpenter ants, termites, and asbestos. And it was a perfect fit for us. And we very painstakingly restored it. We spent a lot of time at Home Depot and Lowe's, and we love it, and it's beautiful. And I care deeply about maintaining the architecture in a way that my husband and I could afford to. So we moved to the Highlands because it's such a special place, and the homes are beautiful. And I think that most folks would agree with me, and they cherish their homes and would want to maintain them.
Thank you. Okay, let's go on to affordable housing. We've got 2 audience questions on this topic, and I have one now coming up as well. So I want to sort of try to meld this together somehow. One audience question is, could you each talk about your opinion on developing more affordable housing in Newton? And that's kind of where I'm going. Please identify the concrete steps that you would take to increase housing options in Newton, specifically for seniors who don't want to downsize and stay in the community, and for young families starting out. So the whole issue of affordability and for different kinds of groups of people, can we just say, yes, we agree that there needs to be more affordable housing in Newton, or does somebody think that we have enough? And then I can move on with the rest of the question.
I'm guessing, I've read some of Dick's materials, I think we both agree there needs to be more affordable housing in Newton. I think how we obtain that is very different.
Which is my question. So how should we be achieving it? So we've got projects like Austin Street where there's some apartments that this has to be some percentage if it's 40B, and no, Austin Street wasn't 40B, but then we have other larger projects. We also have naturally affordable houses that people point to that are smaller houses. What's your take on what exactly do we need for housing and how do we get there? Brenda can go first.
Okay. So this is an area that I think, again, you'll have a clear choice when in terms of voting. So when I look at the two projects that, were spent a lot of time deliberating on in this city, and that's Austin Street and Washington Place. And when I look at those projects, maybe not how they were proposed, but when they were presented to the city council for a vote, I think they meet the very definition of village density and affordability and mixed-use housing. So you mentioned on Austin Street, we actually got 33% affordable units in that proposal, which I think is great. It's also an elevator building, so it's age-friendly, it's got walkability, it's got many of the things that I would dare say are a perfect project. The same goes for Washington Place. I know it took a long time. I don't think Washington Place, when it was initially proposed, is something that I would have approved, but where it ended up is absolutely a structure and a project that has affordable housing and is mixed use, so people of various ages and backgrounds can live there. I have to say, I don't know how someone can say they're for affordable housing and vote no on those two projects.
Well,
Dick.
I'll be happy to tell you how they can do that. First of all, affordable housing, true affordable housing, is what you have when you have projects that Can Do did. I don't know if you know what Can Do is, but they're an organization that have been around for a long time. Since in the last 8 years, they've proposed 6 projects in the city of Newton. I have voted yes on every one of those projects. The last one we just did was in Auburn Street. It was an excellent project. We got the vote just last week on it. That's an affordable project. Myrtle Village is affordable housing project. That's going to be coming up next week as well. Crescent Street, where the Parks and Rec Department used to be, is also an affordable housing project. These are real affordable housing projects. When you talk about Austin Street and Washington Street, those are projects which basically are, in most cases, 75% of fair market value, which means high end, and 75% of that and 25% of affordable housing, which is exactly what I don't think we need in the city to have the high end and the low end. If you want to have true affordable housing project, go to 3 beautiful places in Newton Center, which actually had them. One is the Houghton Village off of Hamlet Street, which was built in 1977, which is a real affordable housing mixed-use project. Castleman House is a senior project. Weeks House, again, projects with affordable housing in them. They were built for affordable housing. They were not a combination of high-end housing and low affordable housing. I can say that I voted against Austin Street and against Washington Place, not because there was affordable housing in them. The only thing good about those projects was that they had some affordable housing in them. But they have to, by the ordinances in Newton, you have to have 15% inclusionary
Thanks.
zoning,
Thanks.
which is basically means that. Can I go?
Yeah, it's time. And we're running late too. So Brenda, you want to chime in? Sorry to cut you off, but I want to move on.
So Austin Street actually has 33% affordable, and Washington Place has 25% affordable. So they exceeded the city requirement. So one of the things that I'm struck by as I'm running for city council is this issue of leading with courage. Now, I'm a huge Josephine McNeil fan, and I am a huge fan of Can Do. You know, NWW, the organization I work at, we had one of our houses developed by Can Do. So I know they do phenomenal work. the thing about the projects you've mentioned is they offer a very limited number of affordable units. I think it takes courage and leadership to go out on a ledge on some of these bigger projects that will truly move the needle in the city on affordable housing. And I think that's what Washington Place and Austin Street do.
How much?
Could I respond to that?
Sure.
The reason we got 33% Austin Street was to flip more votes from the city council so they would go vote yes on that project. That project was originally 25% affordable housing, and they added 6 more units 2 days before the vote so they could get the vote to get that project through. Washington Street, again, that was a project that they tried to get as little, they actually had 15% affordable housing in there and 10% middle class workers housing in there. That again was done to make sure that they got more votes from the city councilors. So these projects are not done to help the poor people come in there. In fact, the apartments that were there on Washington Street before they made everybody leave were less money than what the affordable housing people are going to pay for the new project they're going to build. So I don't look at this as a situation where you want to get affordable housing by having huge developments, which are 75% basically fair market, which means very expensive, and 25% low income. If that's the way we're going to have to do affordable housing, I'm not in favor of it. I think what we really need to do, and we need to get state money and federal money, which is hard to get, which is why it's so hard to get affordable housing. That's the problem. Back in the 70s and 80s, there was a lot of state money and federal money for these kind of things. I don't know the answer about how to build affordable housing. I was just at Houghton Street this summer talking with experts in this, and they had the same problem.
Let me ask you
Wait,
one
can I just say one
follow-up
thing?
question.
My hat goes off to any city councilor that can pressure these developers to increase affordable housing. And we had 2 city councilors on Austin Street who were very brave and put themselves out and got that number up to 33%. That is the role of the city council, is to make projects that are better for the city.
Right. I remember that was Amy Sangiolo was one of them. Let me ask you a question. How much affordable housing do we need in the city? So the 40B statute talks about 10% of number of units. We're somewhere in the mid 7%, 7.5%, which is not unusual for Metro West towns. In fact, I think we have a higher percentage than some of our neighbors. But what is there an amount of affordable housing? How do we know how much we need? When are we done?
Can I just say something
let me ask you
quickly? Okay, first of all, affordable housing has always been a problem. This is not a new problem. Affordable housing has always been a problem, and Newton is always trying to do something about it, and they should. I have no problem with that. I think what the problem right now is, frankly, is middle-class housing, because middle-class housing is disappearing from this city. You're getting middle-class people cannot afford to live in this city when the median price of a single-family home last year was $1.1 million. So the middle-class people can't move here as well. I think that's a huge problem. I'm not saying affordable housing is not a problem. It's been a problem for my whole life, and it's been a problem for hundreds of years, affordable housing. And it's a real problem now because we're not getting any state and federal money out of it. So if it has to come out of the Newton pile of money, and as you all know from what we've already said, there's a lot of debt that Newton has that it has to fulfill. So it's a difficult situation. And to say that somebody like me does not like affordable housing is a complete lie, all right? And I'll say it right out now and right out fast, because I've heard this over and over again, that Blazar doesn't like low affordable housing because he voted against Austin Street and Washington Street. And that is just ridiculous. I voted against that project for nothing to do. The only good thing about those projects was affordable housing. But that's why I vote. I didn't vote against them because I didn't want affordable housing. I didn't like the project. I didn't like the development. The businesses didn't. The abutters didn't. It had nothing to do with not liking affordable housing. And I really resent people telling me that I'm against affordable housing, and as well as senior housing. Okay, I've never voted against any senior housing project. Unfortunately, there's been very few, but there have been some. There's one up in the Benchmark is putting one up at Andover Newton Theological. There's one coming up in Jackson Street that Newton Housing Authority is trying to get going, which they've just filed. There's Golden Mayer has been off and running, so we've got that done. So, trying to imply that I am against low-income affordable housing really makes me angry. All right, there's no truth to it whatsoever, and I really resent this coming out.
Okay, thank you. I'm looking at the clock, and I'm thinking we haven't talked about the new charter yet. Maybe we can make this quick, because I'm sure you both agree on this entirely. So voters are going to vote yay or nay. I think everybody here knows, but just for the sake of our television audience, on the newly proposed city charter, 18 months in the making by the Charter Commission, would shrink the size of the city council, make changes to term limits, eliminate ward councilors. We have a question here, particularly on that part, which I have to remember to get to. There's a 10-year look back to evaluate this in 10 years. But we'd be giving up ward representation. And you both are running for ward councilor. So what is your stance on the new charter? Are you yes or no? I believe, Dick, you've come out against it.
Definitely.
Okay, and Brenda, when we...
So I think the charter is complicated. I can give you
Okay,
a more
what's
involved
your
answer.
view? Give me your view on the charter.
So, as many of you, the charter took me a while to get my head around in terms of whether I was gonna vote yes or no on it. I have the same vote as you all, so it's not something that I ran on for my campaign. But when I sat back and took a look at it, this is what I saw. I saw that this city twice has had a non-binding referendum that we want to reduce the size of the council. We then had an election to elect 9 people democratically throughout the city to revise our charter. These people come from all different backgrounds, all different area of expertise, and they spent the better part of a year looking at our existing charter, looking at best practices, talking to former aldermen and current councilors. They looked at cities that were similar to ours. There's nothing quite like the uniqueness of Newton, which we all know, but they looked at other cities that were similar, and they deliberated. They had a very open and transparent process, and at the end of the day, I decided I trusted the process, meaning I trust these 9 individuals. I think they have our best interests at heart. I think they want what's best for Newton, and this goes back to the video on putting our roads on a diet. To a certain degree, it's a leap of faith, but I trust them, and I read the proposal, and I think it's good. Now, what about this ward representation issue? If I am fortunate enough to serve you all and get elected on November 7th, I will serve as your ward representation, and we've already talked about my commitment to the ward and my accessibility. If I'm effective, and the charter passes, I will then hopefully run at large if the charter passes. I don't see my commitment to this ward changing. I don't see my accessibility changing. I'm still going to live in the ward and care deeply about the ward. So I see the new charter as still allowing us to have ward representation. The big difference I see, though, which I feel actually quite good about, is that everyone will be able to vote on the entire city council. And I have to tell you, when this historic district piece came up, we had a community meeting where all 3 Ward 6 and all 3 Ward 5 councilors were there, and the folks were upset because they didn't know about the historic district, and the Ward 5 and 6 councilors said it's
quickly.
Really a larger council issue.
Okay.
And at that point, I knew I wanted a full vote.
Okay, thank you, Dick. Your take on the charter and response to what Brenda said.
My take is very simple and very clear. I think that the Charter Commission made a terrible mistake on what they wanted to do to restructure the city council. I'm not opposed to lowering the number of city councilors at all. What I am opposed to is what they did. It's not a question of trust and faith and how hard they worked and how much time they put in and best practices. It's what they came up with. And what they came up with is getting rid of local ward representation, pure and simple, which I think is a terrible idea. In addition to that, they have a situation where they want 1 councilor in each ward elected citywide. Everybody's elected citywide, which makes it extremely difficult to run for office, and it costs a lot of money. And it makes no sense to me as to why you'd want a city council that's completely citywide, because what that means is you can run in your ward and win your ward, but if you lose the other wards, then you're not going to be elected. Finally, the way this council has proposed this is there's 4 other people besides one in each ward who could run from anywhere. That means that at least 4 of the 8 wards in the city are going to have 1 city councilor. And if those 4 other councilors come from 1 ward, that means 7 are going to have 1 ward councilor and 5 are going to come from 1 ward. Or if it's spread out more and you have those 4 ward councilors, 2 of them are wards, let's say 7 and Ward 8, then you have 6 wards with 1 councilor and 2 wards with 3. It makes no sense to me. It's totally unbalanced. And there was another best way to do it, which was mentioned to them. I spoke with Brooke Lipset about this in her house for about an hour as to why I thought what they proposed was not the way to go. I clearly didn't make any difference to her or to anybody else, but the idea of getting rid of 1 at-large councilor and going 8 at ward and 8 at large was brought up very, very early and was just thrown out quickly. It was not really seriously discussed as far as I'm concerned. The other thing you have to watch out for, and I think this is a real problem, is if you're going to have 12 ward councilors, you're going to find probably running as special interest slates. So you're going to get political and financial people getting all together and running 12 people on a slate. And that is what you don't want in the city council. Is you want diversity. You don't want groupthink.
Okay. 9 o'clock. Do you want to respond to that, or shall we move on to?
We can move on.
Okay. Why don't I tell you the topics that were left? You can pick one, and we can end it there. So one of them actually is on the topic of the environment, which is my favorite topic to talk about. And so I think I might actually just pick that and go with it. So the environment. So Newton has taken some steps towards being a more environmentally friendly city. We were the first city to adopt a stretch code, which it was in 2009, aims to make new construction energy efficient. We're designated a Massachusetts Green Community, which tries to help cities and towns be more energy efficient. We've banned plastic bags. Public Facilities Committee has passed design guidelines for sustainability and a resolution supporting certain gas leaks related bills in the legislature. Methane is a major radiative forcing agent for contributing to climate change. And there's some coming review on sustainable materials management. It used to be known as waste management. So question is, are we doing enough to be a green community, to be a green city, to do our part in leading the way in being environmentally friendly, cutting our carbon footprint, all these things that people are concerned about. Of course, we're one city and we're not going to solve a global problem, but we can set an example. Are we doing enough? Do you feel good about the work that's being done and the goals that we're trying to achieve? Dick, you want to go first?
I'll go first. The mantra that I've always taken out for environmental issues is very simple. It's think globally and act locally. Especially in these days when we have a president who doesn't believe in climate change, okay, who thinks it's a hoax, and was dropped out of the Paris Accords. So forget the Republicans and the president right now, because nationally we're just stalling, and we've been stalling for way too many years. I think locally, are we doing enough? You know, I think it's so difficult. There's so much that we need to do in the city to try to change what's going on in the rest of the country. I think we're doing what we can. Steve had mentioned some of these things. We have put solar panels in. We've had energy house going to the houses and taking energy discussions about making it more efficient. We've done a lot of tree plantings, trying to fix. The trees are vitally important. We've got one of the best people in the city. I mean, in the state, is our director of urban forestry, Mark Welch, who's wonderful. Mark is just absolutely incredible. He's had done a lot with the trees, cutting trees. Planting trees, saving trees on Beacon Street. We had 40 trees that were going to be taken down, and we knocked it down to 4, mostly because of him. So I think we are doing a lot in the city to try to get the environmental situation better. Of course, we could do more, but that would mean where's the money going to come from to do more? There's so much things going on in the city that it's not easy to pick the ones. Climate change is definitely the most important issue in the world right now. You can see it with what's going on with the weather. We're sitting around here for the last 25 years knowing this, and we're not doing enough about it. But I think Newton is really, in the lead doing this. I think they're doing a good job. I can't criticize them. But unfortunately, unless we get the national federal government going better, we're in big trouble.
Thank you. Brenda?
Sure.
Environmental?
So I think we can always do more. I mean, this is what's great about living in the greatest, as far as I'm concerned, the greatest city in the United States, where we have the technology. The initiatives that you mentioned are innovative. I mean, they're great. We're doing really innovative stuff. I mean, this zero waste proposal that's on the table for 10 years that we really, recycle, that we segregate our garbage to really reduce our waste is innovative. The piece of it, which Dick alluded to, is we actually don't have a choice. We used to think climate change was going to impact our grandchildren. We now know, there were a bunch of kids along the back here earlier tonight. We now know that this community is going to be dramatically changed for them if we don't do something. So in terms of cost, I've done a lot of reading and studying on this, and my understanding is that we can't afford not to, and if we invest up front, the payout later on will even itself out, and the impact on the environment will be phenomenal. So we cannot afford to not do everything we can, and we're in the best place in the world to do it because we're in a community of people that care deeply about this. So the political will is there, and we need to capitalize on that.
Thank you. Well, we've come to the end of the moderated debate there, and we're going to turn to your final statements. I can't remember how much time we agreed to for these statements, but I think it's about 2 minutes or so. And there's also an audience question that is probably going to be answered in your statements, which was for each candidate, what separates you most from your opponent. So I don't know if you're going to be able to cover that, but I thought I would put that out there because I was trying to cover as many of these questions as possible. But why don't we turn to the final statements from each candidate. And since Dick, I think you started off in the beginning of the debate, we'll start with Brenda for this.
Sure. So I'm absolutely thrilled and honored to be your Ward 6 City Councilor candidate. I hope to earn your vote. I hope I made some headway tonight to earn your vote. As I've said, I'm accessible, I'm transparent, and I want to hear from you. I've knocked on about 3,000 doors so far. I've heard from a lot of great people. I think I'm uniquely qualified for this position with my experience in nonprofit and government agencies. And I think that Councilor Blazar and I have highlighted several differences between our candidacy tonight. So I think the voters have a clear choice.
Thank you. Dick?
Yes, I'd like to thank Steve and the Highland Area Council for having this debate. I think it was very interesting, and it's good for the people out there to see it, and hopefully the people will see it on the tapes. I've enjoyed very much being the ward councilor for the last 8 years. It's been a really interesting experience. I've met a lot of people, a lot of good people, most of them very interesting, intelligent, with strong feelings about a lot of things. I think that what you need in a ward councilor is somebody who has a lot of knowledge and experience of the city, for the city. I think I meet that end, seeing as I grew up here and my family's been living here for quite a while. I think that's what you need, somebody with experience and knowledge. I think you need somebody who listens to the residents, the constituents, whether you believe it or agree with them or not. You got to listen, and you have to also respond. You have to come back, hear what they have to say, and respond to it. I think I've filled all of three of those categories, and I've enjoyed what I'm doing. I would like to be reelected again. I ask for your vote. And November 7th, please go out there and vote for me. Thank you.
Well, I want to thank both of you so much for agreeing to do this. And Brenda Noel, Richard Blazar, thank you. And also, I want to thank each and every one of you who have come here to participate in this. Very much appreciated. Thank you again to the Area Council, Serge, the camera crew, and everybody else. So I hope you enjoyed this discussion, and don't forget to vote on November 7th.